The dog stopped barking. That was the first thing he noticed. For 2 weeks at that outpost, the dog had been the most reliable early warning system they had. Any movement beyond the wire, any shift in the darkness, any footstep on gravel, and she would react. Every time, without fail. But that night, standing at the observation post at roughly 2 a.m, he looked down and saw her frozen, not barking, not growling, standing completely still, staring into a specific point in the desert, roughly 200 meters out. He raised his night vision and scanned the distance. The thermal scope showed nothing. He switched back to standard night vision. And there, in the green-washed landscape, something was standing at the edge of where the light died. It wasn't moving. It was just there. He would later tell the men relieving him at watch that the figure had been present for nearly 4 minutes before it was gone. He could not explain how it left. There was no movement, no retreat. One moment, it was visible. The next, the desert was empty. The dog did not relax for the rest of the night. If you find value in long-form historical documentary storytelling, serious, research-based, and made with care, we'd be grateful if you consider subscribing to this channel. It helps us continue this work. Afghanistan has been called many things across many centuries. Travelers called it the crossroads of empires. Military historians have called it a graveyard. The land itself, its mountains, its plains, its ancient rock formations, carries within it a layer of remains of every force that has ever tried to control it. By 2008, American and NATO forces had been operating in Afghanistan for 7 years. The mission had shifted, expanded, and complicated itself in ways that the earliest war planners had not fully anticipated. In Helmand province in the country's south, coalition forces were engaged in some of the most intense ground combat of the entire conflict. Helmand was, at its peak, considered Afghanistan's most dangerous region, witnessing some of the heaviest fighting of the war, where hundreds of civilians were being killed monthly. The terrain in Helmand is unforgiving in ways that go beyond military difficulty. The province is largely flat and open, cut through by the Helmand River and its irrigation canals, but ringed by areas of barren desert where the land offers no concealment, no shade, and no comfort. Summer temperatures in June regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dust storms can reduce visibility to near zero within minutes. The silence in certain parts of this landscape is so complete that it becomes its own kind of pressure. Small units of Marines and British soldiers were tasked with holding observation posts, isolated, exposed positions, usually no more than 8 to 12 men, charged with monitoring Taliban movement, reporting back to main bases, and maintaining a 24-hour surveillance presence. These were not forward operating bases with infrastructure, mess halls, or recreational facilities. They were raw positions on elevated ground, exposed to the elements and enemy fire, where men operated on short sleep, constant vigilance, and the close company of a small number of peers. This combination, isolation, physical exhaustion, extreme heat, constant threat, forms the essential backdrop for understanding what follows. When a new team arrived at a post, the departing unit was expected to give them a full briefing on local conditions. It was customary, expected, and often the only institutional knowledge that transferred from one rotation to the next. But at certain posts in Helmand province, the briefings included things that did not appear in any official report. Official records do not fully match lived experience. Word travels differently in war than it does in peacetime. In garrison, a rumor crosses a base in hours. In a combat deployment, stories carry weight that they might not carry elsewhere. Men who have spent months under fire, who have learned to trust their senses as a matter of survival, tend to be precise in their language when describing something they cannot explain. The stories coming out of certain observation posts in Helmand were not the stories of frightened recruits imagining things in the dark. They were the accounts of trained combat veterans, men who had already proven, in direct engagement with the Taliban that they understood the difference between threat and noise. British soldiers who had occupied certain positions before American units arrived reportedly warned the incoming Marines of what to expect. They described lights that moved through the landscape with no apparent source. They described shadows and figures visible through infrared cameras that vanished when the camera was repositioned. They described noises and voices coming from empty terrain at night, sometimes in the form of screams, sometimes something harder to classify. These warnings were not issued in the tone of campfire storytelling. They were delivered the way a departing unit hands over information about enemy patrol patterns or local threat levels. Similar observations have been reported by unrelated groups. The British units and the American units had rotated independently. They did not share accommodation long enough to cross-pollinate stories. The similarities in their accounts emerged only later, when the reports were compared. The pattern, once identified, was difficult to set aside. What soldiers described encountering at these desert outposts followed consistent patterns across multiple accounts and multiple units. The most commonly reported phenomenon was the presence of figures, human in shape, human in apparent size, that appear at the perimeter of the post in darkness, remained stationary or moved slowly, and then disappeared without the kind of movement that would explain their absence. Men would see a figure standing at a distance of 100 to 200 meters, confirmed by multiple visual systems, and then scan back seconds later to find nothing. Communications equipment at certain posts picked up whispers and static, sometimes in languages no one could identify. Soldiers reported hearing their names spoken when no other person was nearby. Despite the desert heat, abrupt drops in temperature were reported in localized areas. Some soldiers described accompanying sensations, a stench of decay in air with no apparent source, or the overwhelming physical sense of being observed. Animals responded consistently. Dogs stationed at these posts, working animals trained specifically for military environments, would react to stimuli that their handlers could not identify, fixing their attention on specific points in the terrain and refusing to move, or alternately, refusing to approach certain areas of the post at all. The behaviors described suggest a presence that operated at the edge of perceptibility, visible enough to be noticed, but never fully enough to be documented. There is one detail that complicates every rational framework applied to these encounters. The figures were sometimes detected simultaneously on multiple visual systems, standard night vision optics, and thermal imaging. In most conventional explanations for desert mirages or optical illusions, the phenomenon appears on one system and not the other. Thermal imaging detects heat signatures, not reflected light. Standard night vision amplifies available light. They work on entirely different physical principles. Whatever these soldiers were seeing registered on both, no one has offered a complete explanation for that. The land beneath Observation Point Rock in Helmand province had been in use as a defensive position for longer than any current military doctrine could count for. Locals stated that the site had been used as a fort of some kind even during the time of Alexander the Great, when he moved through the region in 330 BC. The visible structure, a collapsed mud fort with arrow slits and the remnants of fortified turrets, sat atop layers of occupation that went back to the Soviet-Afghan War, through tribal conflicts of earlier centuries, through periods of conquest and resistance that no surviving document fully recorded. When the Soviets moved to the Helmand Valley in the 1980s, the area around what would become Observation Point Rock was a site of significant fighting. When the Taliban retook the area from the Soviets, they reportedly executed the Russian soldiers who had been using the rock formation as a hideout. The bodies were buried in the surrounding soil. When the Taliban themselves were later removed by coalition forces in 2008, the post was established by British troops, who began digging defensive positions almost immediately. What they found changed the character of the place before a single unexplained event had occurred. The Marines found the first bone as they scraped a shallow trench. Long, dry, and unmistakably once part of a human leg, It was followed by others. They reburied most of them, but also found bodies. 3 graves close together, and in another, a skeleton still wearing a pair of glasses. The locals had said for years that the area had been used as a grave site for centuries, and that it had been the site of several massacres committed by both sides during the Afghan-Soviet War of the 1980s. The Marines covered the graves and told their successors to stay away from them. The instruction was passed from rotation to rotation, but there was no way to avoid what was underneath. No matter where they dug anywhere on the rock, they would inevitably come up with bones. Observation Point Rock was sitting on top of a graveyard. The first soldiers left that ground quickly when their rotation ended. What they carried with them was harder to identify than any physical object. There's a responsible conversation to be had about the conditions that make unexplained reports emerge from combat environments. And that conversation deserves to be had with the same seriousness applied to the accounts themselves. Sleep deprivation is not a minor factor. Marines and soldiers at small observation posts in high-threat environments typically operated on fragmented sleep cycles, 2 to 3 hours at a time, interrupted by watch rotations, punctuated by the threat of attack. Chronic sleep deprivation, in controlled clinical studies, produces measurable perceptual distortions within 72 hours. After weeks of disrupted sleep, the line between what is seen and what the exhausted brain supplies becomes genuinely difficult to locate. The isolation factor operates alongside this. A psychologist consulting on these accounts noted that soldiers at isolated posts are very cut off from things, with only a small group of men as company. Without contact with the broader world, he observed, people become locked in and baked in their own belief system, with no external reality checks available. The terrain itself produces effects. The Helmand Desert at night generates temperature gradients that can produce visual distortion along the horizon. Wind patterns create sounds that travel strangely across flat ground. An experienced soldier who has spent months in a specific environment may begin interpreting ambient stimuli as intentional signals. These factors explain many of the reports. They do not explain all of them. They do not explain the corroboration. Accounts from soldiers who had never met, who came from different units, different countries, and different rotations, describing the same thing in the same location with consistent specificity. They do not explain the dog. An animal has no belief system to be baked into. A trained military working dog does not generate false positives from accumulated stress narratives. When the dog stops at the same point in the terrain across multiple nights, across multiple watches, that is a data point that psychological explanations cannot fully absorb. Corporal Jacob Lima arrived at Observation Point Rock in June of 2009 as part of an 8-man Marine unit assigned a 60-day rotation. It was 2009, and America had just deployed 30,000 additional troops to Afghanistan. In the midst of that surge, these 8 Marines were given a specific mission: maintain 24-hour surveillance at the post and report any movement. When their unit pulled up the road toward the post, they noticed that the British soldiers they were relieving appeared eager to leave. Not in the way soldiers are always eager to leave a post when their rotation ends. In a different way, the departing British team looked disheveled and anxious, as if they had experienced a recent attack. They had not. There had been no contact that week. The handover briefing was short. Lima took responsibility for the watch schedule and began orienting his men to the terrain. The post offered good visibility in all directions. It sat roughly 20 meters above the surrounding landscape, but that same exposure meant there was no cover, no shadow, no place to be that was not visible to anyone looking. The digging started within the first week. The trenches the British unit had left were not deep enough. When standing normally in the existing trenches, a Marine's head would peer over the top, visible to anyone firing from distance. If they were going to be safe, the trenches needed to be deeper. One of the younger Marines, working roughly 10 meters from Lima, drove his shovel into a section of ground and felt it give differently. The soil collapsed slightly, and when he looked down, there was a pocket, a hollow in the earth, containing what appeared to be pottery shards and ceramic fragments. Old ones. He kept digging, handed some fragments out, and then his hand closed around something larger. It was a femur. Lima recalled the moment without drama. It was simply there. Human. Old. The decision was made immediately. Replace it, fill the hole, mark the spot, and do not return to it. But it happened again and again. No matter where they dug in the outcrop, they would inevitably come up with bones. The post was on top of a graveyard. The dog, a Belgian Malinois the British unit had left behind, known at the post simply by the nickname Ugly Betty, had been described by the departing commander as the best sentry they had. Within the first week, she began exhibiting behavior that Lima could not account for. She would not go near the northern edge of the post after dark. Not avoided, refused, physically refused, planted herself in pulling against any attempt to move her in that direction. Lima noted it, filed it as a behavior anomaly, moved on. 3 days later, he was on watch after midnight when Ugly Betty stood up from beside him, fixed her gaze at a specific point roughly 180 meters out, and stopped making any sound at all. Not a growl, not a bark, complete stillness. Lima raised his optics. Through the standard night vision scope, there was a figure standing in the open desert. It was upright, human in proportion, standing still. He switched the thermal to confirm. The thermal scope showed nothing. He held his position, watching through the night vision. The figure remained. He estimated 4 minutes passed. 4 full minutes of figure standing in open terrain at the edge of sensor range. Then it was not there. No movement preceded its absence. It did not walk away. It simply was no longer visible. Lima said nothing to the rest of the unit until the following morning, when he described what he had seen. 2 other Marines reported having noticed the dog's behavior on previous nights without understanding it. One reported hearing what he could only describe as someone walking on the gravel outside the perimeter, footsteps deliberate close, with no one visible when he looked. They were trained observers. They were men who had spent months developing the ability to assess what was real and what was not in an environment where that assessment was the difference between life and death. None of them had an explanation. The experience at Observation Point Rock did not exist in isolation. What makes a larger body of evidence difficult to dismiss is the consistency of certain details across accounts from soldiers who had no connection to one another in different conflicts, in different parts of the world. A soldier posted in the Baghlan province of Afghanistan, far to the north of Helmand, described a position known locally as Tapa, a burial mound used as a military vantage point since the time of Alexander the Great. He described, in a detailed Reddit post corroborated by unit members, seeing a figure through his thermal imaging lens that he could only identify as human in shape, but that disappeared when the image was repositioned. His account was posted years after his service ended. It was later connected to similar accounts from a completely separate unit that had occupied the same hill. In Iraq, different terrain, different conflict, different unit. A soldier described operating in a compound that his unit shared near Fallujah in 2004. Intermittently, across multiple weeks, different members of the unit reported hearing what they could only describe as footsteps in an empty corridor. The sound was specific enough, boot on concrete, rhythmic, that on 3 separate occasions, armed soldiers went to investigate. Nothing was there. On the 3rd occasion, 2 soldiers went together and heard the sound simultaneously. Neither had been told of the other's previous experiences. Same sounds, same behaviors, same outcomes. A Marine who served in a different location in Helmand province described, in an account collected for a published military paranormal archive, waking in a fighting position to find something at the edge of the space. He described the encounter briefly, without embellishment. He was not frightened, he wrote. So much is completely certain that something was there and completely unable to identify what it was. By the time he had fully oriented, it was gone. He noted it in no official record. He said he had only told the story to 3 people outside of military colleagues who had similar experiences. The cluster is not made of dramatic encounters. It is made of these quieter, more specific moments that the men involved clearly did not enjoy discussing, did not volunteer broadly, and did not embellish. The details are too consistent and too restrained to serve any purpose other than description. Every responsible examination of these accounts must include the serious application of rational explanations, not as a dismissal, but as a standard of intellectual honesty. The desert environment in Helmand produces a phenomenon known as a fata morgana, a specific type of atmospheric optical distortion caused by temperature gradients near the surface. Under the right conditions, a fata morgana can produce the appearance of a distant object, sometimes human in shape, sometimes moving. This has been documented in desert environments globally and would be consistent with at least some of what soldiers described. However, a fata morgana does not produce a heat signature detectable by thermal imaging, and it does not produce sound. The psychological framework of hypervigilance offers another lens. Soldiers in extended threat environments develop heightened sensitivity to any potential stimulus, a survival adaptation that in civilian contexts would be recognized as a trauma response. This heightened state can and does produce false positives. The brain perceives threat where none exists. This is well documented. It explains a significant portion of anomalous combat reports across military history. What it does not explain is corroboration between witnesses who had not discussed their experiences before reporting them separately. Infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the threshold of human hearing, is known to produce sensations of unease, visual disturbances, and a sense of presence in certain environments. Desert terrain, particularly near rock formations with specific geometries, can channel and amplify infrasonic waves. This is a legitimate, peer-reviewed area of acoustic research. It almost accounts for the reports from Observation Point Rock. Almost. The detail it cannot account for is the dog. Infrasound affects animals and humans similarly, but a dog reacted with directed, sustained attention toward a specific point in the terrain. Not generalized unease, but focused attention at a specific location suggests something more targeted than ambient infrasonic resonance. Each rational framework accounts for something. None of them accounts for everything. And that single unresolved detail, different in each case, is what keeps these accounts from being fully closed. Of all the accounts connected to Observation Point Rock in 2009, the one that has remained most consistently discussed among the Marines who were present is the account of the figure at the wire. This occurred during the 5th week of the rotation. The unit was past the point of novelty, past the point of heightened alertness that comes with arriving at a new post. They were in the routine of the place. Watch schedules, daily reports, the mechanical repetition of sustained deployment. It was between 3 and 4 in the morning. The Marine on watch at the northern firing point, the same position that the dog refused to approach, was conducting a standard scan of the terrain when he saw movement at the perimeter, not in the distance, at the wire. He called the next watch rotation immediately. 2 additional Marines came to the position. All 3 conducted independent visual assessments using their respective optics. The thermal imaging returned no heat signature. The night vision showed a figure. This was the detail that would be discussed years later by every Marine who had been at the post that night. The figure was visible on night vision, which works by amplifying reflected ambient light, but absent on thermal, which detects radiated heat. A living human body produces a thermal signature that is nearly impossible to suppress in open terrain. Camouflage materials can reduce it, but cannot eliminate it to the point of complete absence on modern thermal optics. The 3 Marines watched the figure for approximately 6 minutes. During that time, it did not move toward the wire. It did not retreat. It stood at a distance of roughly 30 meters from the perimeter and remained in place. One of the Marines later described looking away briefly, a reflex, not a decision. And when he looked back, the terrain was empty. No one fired. No one radioed the main base. There was a shared, unspoken understanding that what they were reporting would have no operational meaning, no category, no response protocol. They did not write it in the post log. They told the next shift what they had seen. The next shift added their own account to what was becoming a body of experience that none of them had the language to fully describe. Of the 8 Marines who served at Observation Point Rock in that 2009 rotation, 3 were subsequently killed in action in separate incidents in Afghanistan. A 4th was severely wounded in an IED attack. One of the surviving Marines said, years afterward, that he did not believe these facts were unconnected. He cannot explain what he meant by that in a way that could be written down. What remains of Observation Point Rock today is what remains of everything that has stood in Helmand province across its long history of occupation and loss. Stone, dust, and an absence that is difficult to precisely define. The Americans left Afghanistan in 2021. The British had departed years earlier. The Taliban returned to the surrounding region, and the local bazaar, which had been nearly empty during the coalition presence, began slowly returning to life. The rock formation itself remains. The collapsed mud fort remains. What lies beneath the surface has not changed. A local elder, asked through a translator about the American and British soldiers who had been stationed there, said something that the interviewer found difficult to translate precisely. He said that the land around the rock was the kind of land that remembered, that it held within it the experience of everyone who had ever stood on it, fought on it, or died on it, that this was not metaphor, that it was simply a property of the ground. He noted that when the Soviets had moved against the shrine at the nearby village of Amir Aga, the tanks that came to attack it became stuck in the mud, where they were quickly destroyed. The wrecked armored personnel carriers are still visible in the surrounding terrain today. He offered this as evidence of what he was describing, the same way a soldier might offer a grid coordinate. There is no framework, military, scientific, or otherwise, that has produced a complete account of what happened at Observation Point Rock. The reports are documented. The men who made them are identifiable. The corroboration between separate, unrelated units is not in dispute. What is in dispute, what will likely remain in dispute, is what the reports mean. The men who were there tend not to speculate on that question. They state what they saw. They note the details they cannot explain. They move on, the way soldiers learn to move on from things that do not fit the operational picture. But some of them, in the years since, have mentioned something that does not appear in any official debrief. They mention that they still think about the dog, the way she stood in the dark, completely still, fixed on a point in the empty desert, not frightened, attentive, as though she could see something that was simply taking a long time to leave.